G7 ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਬਾਦੀ ਹੈ ਬਹੁਤ ਤੇਜ਼ੀ ਨਾਲ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਹਦਾ ਵਧੇਰੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਿਹਰਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਅਤੇ ਜੇਕਰ ਯੂਕਰੇਨ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਇਮੀਗਰੈਂਟਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਟੈਂਪਰੇਰੀਲੀ ਕੁਝ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮਾਂ ਦਾ ਲਾਹਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 1 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੰਟਰਸਟ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਲਿਮਟਿਡ ਜਿਹੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ 'ਚੋਂ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 6.25 ਲੱਖ ਜਾਂ 6.5 ਲੱਖ ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਅਰਜ਼ੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਅਪਰੂਵ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ ਸਨ ਅਤੇ 1,33,000 ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਦੇ ਅੰਕੜੇ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਯੂਕਰੇਨੀਅਨ ਮੂਲ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ 2022 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਾਂ 2014 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਦੋਂ ਦਾ ਕ੍ਰੀਮੀਆ ਦੀ ਜੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਕਾਫੀ ਲੋਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਨੇ। ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਨੇ ਯੂਕਰੇਨੀਅਨ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਆਈਹੋਰ ਮਿਚਲਚਿਸਨ ਹੋਣੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ CEO ਨੇ ਯੂਕਰੇਨੀਅਨ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਯੂਕਰੇਨੀਅਨ ਮੂਲ ਦੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਮਦ ਬਾਰੇ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ। ਆਈਹੋਰ ਕੈਨ ਬੈਟਰ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨ ਦੈਟ ਐਂਡ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਈਏ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। Hello, Ihor, ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ, welcome to the program.
Sat Sri Akal, hello.
Hi there. Hello, kindly introduce yourself. Ihor, you are CEO of Ukrainian Canadian Congress, right?
That's right. My name is Ihor. I'm here in Ottawa. I'm working with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which is our community federation, and we had a big announcement today about extending the support for Ukrainian refugees, but happy to tell you more about it.
So what is this, Canada-Ukraine authorization of emergency travel? What does it mean?
That's right. So a year ago, about a year ago, 13 months ago, we saw Russia invade Ukraine, and we've all seen millions of Ukrainians fleeing their homes into Europe and then, to other places past Europe. So Canada, the government of Canada has this emergency visa. It's called QIT. We sort of call it that for abbreviation. It basically allows Ukrainian citizens and their families to come to Canada on a temporary basis for up to 3 years to work and live here. And we've seen about 170,000 Ukrainians out of the 8 million that have fled Ukraine come to Canada on that basis. And today the government announced that they will continue to offer supports to people who come until next March of 2024.
Ihor, make me understand, what does it mean by temporary program? Because this program, I think, gives permission to stay, work and study for 3 years. And what happens after that?
Well, we hope that we hope that Ukraine, by these 3 years, actually by sooner than that, will win the war. As we know, Canada and other countries have been helping Ukraine with tanks and military assistance and ammunition and army training. And so the goal is to help Ukraine win the war, to help Ukraine return to peace by making the Russians leave the territory they've invaded. And we know that Ukrainians want to return to their homes, to return to the cities and towns where they had to flee before February 24th of last year. So the intention is to give Ukrainians a temporary shelter, whether in Europe or here in Canada, while the war is on and it is in a dangerous point. And we know that with Canada's assistance that Ukrainians are making good progress in combating the Russian army.
And you mentioned until Ukraine wins the war. Kindly explain and define what would you mean by winning the war? When we will come to that point that we have won now?
Well, it's been going on for just over a year, so it's a very complicated situation. Thousands of Ukrainians have been killed, and millions have fled, and including here to Canada. So for us as Ukrainians, winning the war means pushing out and forcing out the Russian army that has invaded Ukraine, back back to the borders of Russia, out of these areas that they have invaded, and that includes eastern Ukraine and Crimea in the south, and so that's part of what it looks like. Ukraine wants peace, and so that peace means getting the Russian army out. But they also want justice. We want for the terrible war crimes that have been committed. We've seen civilian populations targeted every day. Even today, we saw Russian missiles shooting into apartments in the middle of Ukrainian cities, killing people, innocent civilians. So that's part of the other process is a longer process of justice and the prosecution of these terrible events.
Well, my assumption is that person who stays for 3 years in some country, the chances of going back are almost minimal because that's too long of a time. And if somebody gets extension, then probably they're choosing to stay in Canada forever. But my next question is that the other day when I was listening to Michael Ignatieff, who used to be a president of Liberal Party of Canada, he was saying that the end of the war and the winning of the war, it may mean differently for different parties, because for America it's different, for Ukraine it's different, for Russia it's different, because Ukrainians, like you said, that want probably Crimea and all those places where Russian forces are residing now, and America and NATO countries, they're helping Ukraine by staying at a distance. But post-war, Michael Ignatieff was saying that post-war time, probably America doesn't want Vladimir Putin to go. They are definitely they'll be interested to keep him. They won't need any other extreme right thinking person to be president of Russia. So different interests and different approaches.
For sure. So to your first point, I mean, we've seen about 170,000 Ukrainians have come to Canada temporarily, and we have already seen some of those people going back because men in Ukraine 18 to 60 are not allowed to leave. So it's the husbands and brothers and fathers that are serving in the Ukrainian army or working in Ukraine are not allowed to leave their family under most circumstances. There are some exceptions to that based on how large families are or medical situations. So, it's been very difficult. I know people who have gone back to Ukraine. They accept the danger that is there because they just can't see how they could, live apart for so long. But there, as you said, it's going to be more difficult to go. The longer people are here, the longer kids are here in schools, and the longer people work here, it will be difficult. But again, we are hopeful that with support, Ukraine will be able to win the war. On your second point, I mean, we here in Canada, the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, the Canadian government, we believe that supporting Ukraine's view of what peace is the most important. That Ukraine has internationally recognized borders. Russia has consistently ignored those borders and invaded and decided, 1 year that they don't like the border of Crimea. The next time they are in eastern Ukraine 9 years ago. So we think that listening to the Ukrainians on the kind of peace that they can accept and live with is the most important.
I got two questions. You can answer them briefly. First is that, are there any other countries in the world that are even close to the immigration program that Canada is offering to Ukrainians? And secondly, if we talk about the peace, who do you think Ukrainians think is the best suitable country to start the peace process? Is it China, India, or any other country?
Well, most of the refugees that fled Ukraine, I mean, all of them fled west into Europe. So Poland had 1.5 or 6 million refugees. I think now the number is around 2 to 3 million Ukrainians are still in Poland. And that number in Western Europe has moved throughout Europe, to England, to Germany, to France. So there's the numbers that are put out internationally. There's about 6 or 7 million Ukrainian refugees in Europe itself, and countries like the United States and Australia and Canada have all opened some kind of temporary programs to allow people to come on a temporary basis. And yes, we're hoping that there will be some options for families for reunification, but that hasn't been announced yet, and we're not there yet. In terms of your second question, I don't have an answer. I don't like, in this situation, I don't like hypotheticals. I think that
because there's a general feeling like which of the countries which are they're trying, they're giving some sort of hints that they can play as a mediator. China, Xi Jinping was there. India was saying, Mr. Modi was saying time and again that if given chance, they can try.
I think it's important. I take your point, but I think that we have to be very careful in not backing Ukraine into a corner on negotiating away something that it doesn't want or can't negotiate away, right? That Ukraine, it's like asking us as Canadians which part of Canada would we give up, if we needed to, right? Which part is the least important, or which part are we prepared to live without? So I think that part of the Russian narrative has been to sort of suggest that Ukraine isn't really, a country in the way that other countries are, or there are some parts of Ukraine that are less important or more negotiable. And I think that's an important thing to think about, to say, the Ukrainian people, especially now, are very united and very much fighting and dying every day to protect their country and to regain its borders as a sovereign nation. And so I don't subscribe to the theory that Putin will listen to anybody, unfortunately, other than the Ukrainians pushing him out physically with their military.
Probably this is war propaganda that we are listening to news that Mr. Putin is losing his sport in Russia. So what's happening with Mrs. Zelensky's sport in Ukraine?
Well, Ukrainians are incredibly supportive of him as their president, and I think here and around the world, I think you can see that Zelensky is a leader who speaks clearly, who is very moral and very persuasive in his arguments. And I think that he is the opposite. He is a democratically elected president of Ukraine, and that he is the opposite of Putin. Putin has been around and continues to sort of make a system that allows him to remain president forever. He jails his opponents. He kills and threatens his political opposition, and Russia is certainly not a democracy, and so Mr. Zelensky, I think, is a hero in the broad sense and the narrow sense of the word, in this moment, but as a symbol, but also in his management and leadership for the world in facing off against Russia.
Ihor, we continuously talk about this issue, and most of my listeners they are of the view that Ukrainian land is being used by NATO and America and all the countries that are supporting Ukraine as an experiment, as a laboratory, because they want Russia to get tired of this war and they want to prolong this war. So by staying at a distance and helping and giving some sort of weaponry to Ukraine is a different thing rather than being part of it. And what's happening with the membership of Ukraine of NATO? Is it on the hold now? Is still under process?
Well, Ukraine, like Georgia and like other countries, applied and expressed interest, many years ago to be in the NATO alliance, but that hasn't moved forward, and that's there's big decisions and big reasons for that within NATO and within Ukraine. I would say that Ukraine, the Prime Minister of Japan was just in Ukraine yesterday, and there's a broad coalition. I think more than 50 countries that support Ukraine with humanitarian and military and financial support, because they understand, as democracies, they understand that if Putin wins in Russia, he will not stop. He will not stop at the Polish border or the border of Lithuania, Estonia, or Georgia, or Kazakhstan, or whatever the next target is. That the Russian agenda here is to prove that peace will be dictated by dictators to democracies, and I think that in this world where we see that this kind of terrible military force is exerted out on a civilian population, it's very important that we as citizens in a democracy support each other and support the just peace that Ukraine can achieve by being a sovereign and independent country. And the invasion is nothing more than a pretense to rebuild the Soviet Union, I think.
Ihor, thank you very much for your time, sir. Shukriya. Thank you.
Thank you very much.